Hello, class. I want to give you guys a very brief lecture today about chapter 4. It's called Understanding Fiction. And the primary purpose of this chapter is to introduce you to the types of fiction that are out there. And many of you probably know this, and that's great. But this chapter is incredibly important for the nature of the vocabulary I'm asking you guys to learn, because each chapter has a set of vocab that you're going to be tested over. Those are all literary terms and things that some of you will already just be like, I got it. Well, that's good. Good for you. And I'm not going to belabor that because it's not the extreme focus, but it is important you know how to use this language. And when I talk about a short, or I talk about prose, or I talk about a certain type of poetry or form of poetry, I need you to understand what that is. So when you're reading through chapter 4, it's going to give you a bunch of definitions. So, like, it starts out talking about a narrative is a story. It tells a story by presenting events in some logical or orderly way. And a work of fiction is a narrative that originates in the imagination of someone. So we know fiction is a story that is not true, and nonfiction is a story that is. So while that may seem very elementary, the idea of a narrative, meaning a story that has a progression, when I use that term, I want everybody to understand what I'm talking about. This chapter goes into the origins of modern fiction and how they use different literary terms and literary devices. So there's literary devices. Literary devices are things like alliteration, anaphora. It gives the example of rhyme, those sorts of things. Those literary devices are used within literary texts or stories or prose or poetry. And what those things do is create meaning. So alliteration is the repetition of a letter at the beginning of each word. And it creates a movement and a sound. And what alliteration does is it brings that particular sentence or sound to the forefront of the reader. So anything like Peter Piper picked pickled peppers. Is that right? I can't even remember that childhood little rhyme. But anything that starts with that same repetitive note. Now, all of you guys right now are repeating that in your minds. You're probably like, I got it. So those sorts of things, the repetition of a sound, but that becomes a type of a rhyme or a limerick type thing, or anything that brings your attention to that sound makes it memorable. Obviously, not that memorable to me, but like, there's all these different types of poems. We start with epic. Epic is the first poem. It has the oral history. That's the way people told stories, because they didn't write things down, and they traveled and they were nomadic, and these stories were told throughout families and they were repeated. So we go from that to romance, to all it travels all the different types of poetry. Sonnet, it's not always mentioned in here. Then this chapter talks about the history of the novel. Well, a novel has has its own entire layout where you get to explore the depths of characters. Themes are fully explored. Plots and conflict are fully explored within a novel. Epic drama, epic poems have that same thing. There's this history, this political, and even a hero's journey that's threaded throughout an epic poem. And that's particular to that poetry. Romance has its own particular threads that of literary devices and literary storyline within it. When you read a romance novel, you're expecting to read about love or heartbreak or something along the relationships of something along the line of relationships. Well, with novels, they developed slowly and they changed. There's so many different types of genres of novels, and genres being the different types of novels you can read, of course. So as the book goes on, it explains how novels changed and what their purpose was. Like right now, I'm teaching Pride and Prejudice to a group of seniors at a high school, and it's a novel of manners. And the novel of manners matters because it was during the 1800s when times were changing and they were changing for women, and marriage was extremely important, and it was the most important thing a woman could do is get married. And so that was a focus of this novel, Pride and Prejudice, but also because the woman's feelings didn't matter. And in one way, the author is poking fun of it, and in another way, she's being a little bit snobbish about it too. So it's also talking about character, and doesn't character matter when you choose a partner, and does the feelings of a person matter when you choose a partner for the 1800s. And so this chapter moves on through modernism, and it talks about the history of the short story. Well, the short story for us is going to be extremely important, and that's why I've spent very little time on the others, and I'm going to spend more on this. The short story has evolved over the course of time. And the difference between a short story and a novel is it's the complete opposite. You have far less time to develop a character. You have far less time to develop a theme or a plot line or conflict. But what happens in this story, in a short story, is it begins right in the center. Sometimes a short story will start like an epic in media res. In media res means in the middle. So a short story will start in the middle of something. Sometimes it'll start very close to the conflict of the story that of the plot line that you're reading. So and it's evolved from different narrative forms. I mean, they've kind of conflated, and they've been built together to be its own thing. So it is distinguished by its relative brevity, which creates a specific set of expectations and possibilities, as well as certain limitations. I'm on page 73 on chapter 4 when I read that definition. And the short story is what we will mostly read here in our class, and the short being less than 1,500 words. The shorts are actually very fun to write as well, because you are starting right in the middle of the story. The story we are given as on page 75 is called Hills Like White Elephants, and it's written by Ernest Hemingway. And the story, I want you to read the short story, and I want you to focus on how the message is subtle. Like, they never come straight out and say exactly what they're talking about. You are supposed to infer and gain from the context of the conversation and the dialogue what is happening. And this was written, let's see what year this was written, 1927. And essentially, this couple, and I'm probably going to do a little spoiler alert, but this was written about a couple who are having a conversation in a bar about whether she should get an abortion or not. And this is in 1927. So the idea of this being talked about in this time period and written about was very, very grave. Mainly because it was illegal for a woman to get an abortion. And secondly, it was exceedingly dangerous. And the nature of this woman feeling pressured to get an abortion, and the difference of the conversation between or the way the woman speaks about it and the way the man speaks about it in the story. So when you read that, I want you to take into account several things. One, how fast the story starts. When does the conflict arise in the story? When do they start talking about the topic they're talking about? Because they never say it out loud. What is your response to the woman's voice? What is your response to, what's your gut instinct or gut reaction to the man and how he talks about how it's such a natural thing and it's easy and it's fast? And I want you to critique that. When you read it, I want you to read critically. Think about the words they're saying. Don't just take it in. Just don't let it go in your eyes and out your ears. think about how things are said. The first sentence starts with the hills across the valley of the Ebro were long and white, and on this side there was no shade and no trees, and the station was between two lines of rails in the sun. Close against the side of the station, there was the warm shadow of the building and a curtain made of strings of bamboo beads. So it begins with the description and it gives you a setting. Right away, it starts with a description of the setting, puts you right in place, and then it moves on to the couple. The American girl was with him. Let's see, I hung across the open door into the bar to keep the flies out. Continue with the bamboo beads. The American and the girl with him sat at a table in the shade outside the building. It was very hot, and the express from Barcelona would come in 40 minutes. It stopped at this junction for 2 minutes and went on to Madrid. So we're getting the idea they're waiting. Okay, they're waiting. They're having a cocktail, and they're going somewhere. And the girl says, "What should we drink?" She had taken off her hat and put it on the table. "It's pretty hot," the man said. "Let's drink beer." So they're having this conversation, and it can seem very ordinary. All right, that's what I want you to pick up on, how ordinary this conversation is, and yet at the same time, it's life altering for her and for him. So I want you to read it, and we'll talk about it. But it's like 3.5 pages. So and then it gives on page 79. It gives a very short, very brief kind of synopsis of it. And I want you to pay attention to that after you kind of come up with your own ideas after you read it. So then the boundaries of fiction, it talks about the boundaries of fiction, and there are boundaries. The short story is a work of fiction that's marked by its brevity. A novella, like Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis, which I love that story. I love that story. It's a great one. Another good, really good novella is The Death of Ivan Ilyich. That's a very good novella. And then shorts under 1,500 words and prose poems. Prose poems are a mixture of literally a prose story and poetry, and we have examples of that. And then, of course, graphic stories or graphic fiction, which are so fun and they're so creative. And I really encourage you, if you're not a big reader, you don't love to read, but you like cartoons, check out graphic fiction. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Entire classic stories have been made into graphic fiction and graphic novels, and they're so fun. And I mean, what the most important part is that you're learning and growing in that. So that is my little brief synopsis of chapter 4. It really involves you reading the chapter and getting all that vocabulary down, writing that down, having yourself a study guide, and knowing that you're going to be quizzed over those terms. That's the most important part of that. But also when you read these short stories, read for, the subtlety of the conversation. Take in the setting, the plot, the characters, how all of those things are being brought to you, the reader, and just kind of take note of that. I wish we could have a conversation back and forth right now, but we'll have to wait on that. But this kind of goes into, this is going to start leading into our draft 1, our essay 1, draft 1. So I will do another short video. This one is under 15 minutes. I'm very proud of myself. So I hope these are helpful for you while you read. And if you have questions, I'm going to put up a discussion board post where you're able to post questions about things that are confusing to you, and I'll be checking those. But I hope you're all doing well. Look forward to seeing you next week, and I hope you're enjoying your day off. Take care.